mess with my kids? That's gonna cost you a pretty penny, and get you in trouble with the law. So, I've got an acquaintance, Richard, who has always been of the I know better than you school of thought. What makes it worse is that he literally received his PhD in physics from one of my country's top universities about 6 months ago, so he's not a dummy. The problem is that he thinks that because he's a physics genius, that means he knows better than everyone about everything. Just an example, my kids are in Montessori schools. This is a decision my wife and I reached together, and we're very happy with it. When he heard, he went on a 30-minute rant/lecture about how we're throwing our money away and Montessori is nonsense. When I told him that I had read and even professionally translated studies proving the opposite, and gave him some real-world examples. Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, Jeff Bezos, Larry Page, etc. He still would not admit he might not be 100% correct. Not the subject of this revenge. But so you understand the person we're dealing with. Another thing that's important to note is that Richard does not have Asperger's or anything similar. We joke about this all the time, and he's been tested from here until next week. He's just a really smart, socially oblivious, pain in the ass. Given all of the above, I try to limit my time with him, but unfortunately, that isn't always possible. And last week we were both at the same group braai for a friend, Jack, who was visiting back home from overseas. I've known Jack since grade school, so we brought our families and made it more than just a long time, no see type of thing. At some point later on in the afternoon my eldest, awesome, 10 years/show, came to me really sad and said she wanted to go home. When I asked her why, she said that Richard had just spent 15 minutes telling her that she shouldn't eat hot dogs because they're unhealthy, and he explained what went into hot dogs and what they're made out of. Awesome is not a vegetarian, knows that the beef and chicken she eats used to be live animals, and has never professed interest in vegetarianism. At the same time, when a kid is eating a hot dog, they don't care or want to know what's inside. We spoke a bit, I calmed her down and I told her to ignore Richard and go play with her siblings and her friends. Being a kid, she was thankfully easily distracted by something else and moved on. I didn't want to make a fuss with Jack or with Richard, so I just let it be. This turned out to be a mistake. About 30 minutes later I heard Awesome scream and begin crying. I ran over to her. Richard had come up to her and knocked her hot dog out of her hand, saying she shouldn't eat that garbage. I handed Awesome over to my wife for damage control, and I took Richard aside and told him that A, you don't ever talk to a man's kids without permission, B, you don't ever teach a man's kids without permission, and C, you sure as shit don't ever touch a man's kids without permission. He doesn't have kids, so I still wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. This turned out to be a mistake. Instead of doing the mature thing and moving on, he decided to double down on the hot dog issue. This was the hill he was going to die on. My kids shouldn't be eating hot dogs. Keeping Jack in mind, I disengaged and told him to stay the duck away from my family. I kept my eye on him, and he didn't come near them. Jack enjoyed, we all ate some good meat, end of the story as far as I'm concerned. This turned out to be a mistake. A few days later we received a visit from a child protection officer who claimed that we were neglecting our kids, specifically Awesome. She came in and saw that while the house could have been cleaner, what house with kids is spotless? Everything was fine. She sat with Awesome for a few minutes and asked her some questions, said everything was fine, and left. First thing I did was call a friend of mine who is a lawyer, just to be on the safe side. He said it looked to him like we were in the clear, but we should keep in touch with him just in case. Next, I began working the grapevine. It turned out that Richard had been offended by how I treated him after the hot dog incident, so he filed a false anonymous report. Being Richard, and never thinking he could ever be wrong, he was even talking about it as if people should be proud of him for what he did. I had to make sure, though, so the last thing I did before dropping the hammer on him was confronting him personally. I set my phone to record and went to his house. He doubled down yet again, saying we were torturing Awesome. He's the one who called protective services on us, and he'd do it again in a heartbeat. This turned out to be a mistake. I'm not the violent type, but I swear I wanted to break the son of a witch in half. I told him that if he came near myself or anyone in my family again, I'd have a restraining order put out on him, and I'd make sure every single one of our shared acquaintances knew why. I listened to the recording in my car, and his admission that he filed a false report came out clear as day. I immediately forwarded it to my lawyer, who said he'll get the ball rolling with some friends of his with the public prosecutor to see if we could get Richard in trouble, using his admission. Still waiting on that, the wheels of justice turn slowly sometimes. Then, I enacted my actual revenge. See, after he got his PhD, Richard bragged about the new flat he'd be moving into as soon as he sold his current flat. To that end, he renovated most of his current flat, including putting in lots of new, and expensive, features that required lots of electrical work. He did the same on his new flat. He did most of the electrical work himself, which is a big no-no unless you're licensed. I called in an inspector on both of his flats, who asked to see certification on who did the electrical work. Obviously, there was no certification. It wouldn't surprise me if, Richard being Richard, he began arguing with the inspector that his work was good enough and he didn't need to pay someone else to do it for him. I haven't seen or spoken to Richard since, but I've heard that he had to bring in a certified electrician to examine every single change he made in both flats. This meant dismantling everything and having it inspected. Turns out the buyers of his old flat weren't happy with the delay in receiving the keys, and were even unhappier when they learned why there was a delay. They walked away from the deal and are taking him to court. Because his sale fell through, he's now in the hole paying mortgages on 2 flats. I don't know if there was a fine levied against him, but I sure as hell hope so. Lesson of the story: you don't ever duck with a man's kids. Now to the comments. That was a well-crafted report on, Indeed, pro-revenge. Tick is lucky you didn't call the police on him for battery of a child. OP replied, I know who and how he is, so I was willing to let things slide to not make things uncomfortable for Jack. As I admitted, this turned out to be a mistake. If Dick ever decides he wants to start up again, I've got a police report ace up my sleeve. But I don't want to duck his life up that bad, unless he really makes me do it. Then you cross over into r/nuclear revenge territory. I need closure. What condiments does Awesome put on their hot dogs? Please update this if you hear back from your lawyer friend. I hope old Dr. Dick learned something. But probably not. I second the update about the lawyer. People who file false claims of child abuse deserve every brick that's about to fall on them. Absolutely. Our upstairs neighbors called CPS on us a few years ago because our 2-year-old entered tantrum phase and was screaming fairly frequently. They showed up and took one look at us and our kid. The way our house is basically a nursery, and they just let us off. He doesn't have kids, so I still wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. Screw that. I don't have kids and know that this is a no-no. He's a dumb mother ducker and has no excuse. For real though, I don't think you have to have kids to know not to be a dick to kids. Or to knock food out of their hands. Or even touch them. Hell, one of my friend's daughters is at my house constantly enough that we joke she's another one of mine. Kids being kids, she did some dumb shit. Not serious enough for me to even get annoyed really, but enough to drop her dad a line as a heads up. Dude was really trying to tell me to spank her. Like WTF brah, no, I'm not touching your kid, hell no. I have never spanked another person's kid, I don't even spank my own. But other people's kids are subject to the same rules in my house when their parents aren't there. It usually just takes a verbal reminder and they go on their merry way, but I've definitely meted out timeouts and short-term loss of privileges. I figure if you trust your child to be in my care, you trust me to give appropriate discipline. Same if my child is in your care, and a big reason I'm so picky about where my kids spend time when they're 10. He's not socially oblivious, he's an asshole. Legal and smart, revenge is sweet. 10/10. Before reading this, if someone had told me that a complaint about a child eating a hot dog was directly connected to electrical work having to be redone on 2 flats resulting in a lawsuit by a buyer of one of the flats, I would have said that there was no way in hell those things could possibly be connected. My hat's off to you, OP. I think the real revenge will be when he's prosecuted for filing a false report to Child Protective Services. When that happens, think of the fun you'll have sharing it on social media.